I want to start by telling you something that most people who make videos about the Amish will never tell you. The thing that outsiders get most wrong about Amish life is not the buggies or the clothing or the absence of electricity. It is this. The Amish have a more developed, more nuanced, and in some ways more honest relationship with the subject of intimacy than almost any community in the modern world. Not because they talk about it openly. They do not. Not because they are permissive or progressive in the ways that word is currently used. They are neither, but because they have thought about it seriously and carefully and within a coherent framework of belief. In a way that the outside world, for all its apparent openness, frequently has not. I grew up inside that framework. I left it at 26, and it took me years on the outside to find language for what I had understood inside, wordlessly, from the time I was a girl. What the Amish believe about intimacy is not what you think they believe, and some of it, the parts that surprised me most when I was finally able to see it clearly, is more radical than anything I have encountered in the modern world. I am going to tell you all of it, but I need to start at the beginning, and the beginning is not where you expect it to be. Before we go any further, there is something I want to say from the heart. More than 90% of the people watching this right now have not subscribed yet, and perhaps that would not matter so much if this were simply information about a community most people find curious. But it is not simply that. What I am going to tell you in this video touches something that goes far beyond the Amish. It touches the way all of us understand the relationship between our bodies, our commitments, our communities, and our deepest selves. If something in what I have already said is pulling you forward, if you are already wondering what the radical thing is, please subscribe before we continue. It is completely free. It keeps this community alive. And while you are here, tell me in the comments, what feeling brought you to this video tonight? I read every single word you write. Let me tell you first what the Amish do not believe, because the assumptions people bring to this subject are so thoroughly wrong that I need to clear them away before anything true can be seen. The Amish do not believe that the body is shameful. This is perhaps the most common misunderstanding, and it matters enormously. The tradition of Christian thought that regards the physical body as a source of sin, as something to be suppressed and distrusted, and ultimately transcended, is not the tradition the Amish inhabit. The Amish tradition, rooted in Anabaptist theology and the practical reality of agricultural life, regards the body as a creation of God and therefore as something fundamentally good. The body works, the body labors, the body produces and repairs and endures. Amish life is deeply physical in ways that most modern lives are not, and that physicality is not experienced as a compromise of spiritual life. It is experienced as an expression of it. This matters for understanding what they believe about intimacy, because it means that Amish teaching on the subject does not begin from a position of suspicion toward the body. It begins from a position of order. The question is not whether physical intimacy is good. The question is, what makes it mean something? What gives it weight? What places it inside a life, rather than simply happening to a life? The answer the Amish give to that question is marriage. And I know that sounds obvious, even simple, until you understand how seriously and specifically they mean it. For the Amish, marriage is not primarily a romantic arrangement or a legal contract or even a personal fulfillment. It is a covenant, a word that carries a specific and serious weight in their theology. A covenant is not a promise between two people. It is a promise made before God and community that binds not just the two individuals, but the community itself as witness and guarantor. When Amish couples marry, the community does not simply attend the wedding. The community accepts a responsibility to support the marriage, to hold it accountable, to treat it as something that belongs, in some sense, to all of them. This is the first thing that surprised me when I began to examine it from the outside. The Amish understanding of marriage is not private, it is communal. And their understanding of intimacy is therefore not private either. Not in the sense that anyone outside the marriage knows or discusses what happens inside it, but in the sense that, The intimacy inside a marriage is understood to be connected to something larger than the two people involved. It is understood to be part of the fabric that holds the community together. And that understanding changes everything about how it is treated. Now, let me tell you about something that will genuinely surprise you, something I did not fully appreciate until I had been outside the community for several years and began reading about what researchers who study Amish families actually find. Amish marriages have one of the lowest divorce rates of any identifiable community in the United States. This is not simply because divorce is forbidden, though it effectively is. It is because the structures that surround Amish marriage are designed with a sophistication that is easy to miss because it is never articulated as design, to make the conditions for lasting intimacy as strong as possible. Let me tell you what those structures actually are. The first is proximity. Amish couples, particularly in the early years of marriage, live and work in genuine closeness to each other. The farm is not a place the husband leaves and returns to. It is a shared project. The wife is not managing a separate domestic sphere, while the husband manages a separate professional one. They are building something together, physically and daily, in the same space, with their hands and bodies and shared attention. This kind of proximity, researchers who study attachment and bonding consistently find, is one of the most powerful builders of deep and lasting connection. Modern life has largely eliminated it. The Amish have never lost it. The second structure is community accountability. And I want to be careful here because this can sound like surveillance, and in some cases it is. But what it mostly is, at its best, is the simple knowledge that the people around you are invested in your marriage. That if things become difficult, there are people who will notice and who have a responsibility to help. Modern couples frequently face their difficulties in complete isolation, with no one around them who feels entitled or equipped to be present in any meaningful way. Amish couples face their difficulties inside a community that understands itself as having a stake in the outcome. This is not always comfortable, but it is, research consistently finds, protective. The third structure is the absence of comparison. This one is harder to explain, but it is important. Amish people are not exposed to a constant stream of images and narratives about what intimacy should look like, feel like, what it should produce, how often it should happen, whether their experience measures up. The modern world bathes people in this kind of comparison constantly, from advertising to entertainment to social media, to the entire apparatus of a culture that has decided that intimacy is both the most important thing in life and a performance that can always be improved. The result is a kind of perpetual dissatisfaction, a sense that whatever you have is somehow insufficient because somewhere something better exists. Amish people are largely protected from this. What they have is what they have. It is not being measured against an imaginary standard constructed by people trying to sell them something. Now I want to tell you about bundling, because you may have heard of it, and I can almost guarantee that what you have heard is not accurate. Bundling was a courting practice used historically in some Amish and other plain communities, and in various forms in many pre-industrial cultures across the world. In its Amish form, it involved a courting couple spending time together overnight, in the same bed, fully clothed, sometimes with a board between them, or the young woman, sewn into a bundling bag, talking through the night. The purpose was courtship, getting to know each other, having the kind of extended, uninterrupted conversation that the communal structure of Amish life made otherwise nearly impossible. The outside world has always found bundling either titillating or absurd. It finds the physical proximity combined with the expectation of restraint either naive or hypocritical. What it almost never finds is what I want to suggest to you, which is that bundling reflects a sophisticated understanding of something that modern courtship frequently gets backwards. The premise of bundling is that two people can be physically present to each other, can be in genuine proximity and vulnerability, without that proximity being primarily or immediately sexual. The premise is that presence and conversation and the particular intimacy of the night hours are valuable in themselves, that you can know a person, really know them, through that kind of extended, unguarded talking in a way that a series of structured daytime encounters cannot produce. Modern dating frequently works in the opposite direction. It begins with physical attraction and hopes that genuine knowledge of the person will follow. The Amish tradition of bundling, at its best, began with the attempt to genuinely know the person and trusted that physical attraction, if it was real, would remain. I am not arguing that bundling as a practice should be revived. I am suggesting that the premise underneath it is more sophisticated than it is usually given credit for. Let me tell you now about what the Amish believe about the relationship between intimacy and children, because this is the area where their beliefs are most different from modern assumptions and where I think the difference is most worth examining carefully. The Amish do not use contraception. This is well known. What is less well known is the reasoning behind it, which is not simply obedience to a rule, but reflects a genuine theological position about the relationship between intimacy and new life. The Amish understanding is that these two things, physical union and the possibility of children, are not separable in the way modern culture assumes they are. That separating them is not simply a practical decision, but a statement about what intimacy is for. A statement the Amish tradition declines to make. I want to be honest with you about my own complicated feelings about this. I am a woman who left the Amish community partly because the expectation of continuous childbearing was something I could not accept without losing myself. I understand, from the inside, the weight that this belief places on women specifically. It is not an equal weight. It never has been. The theology is shared between men and women. The physical consequences are borne by women alone. That is a real and serious asymmetry, and I do not want to smooth it over in the interest of presenting a tidy picture. And yet, when I look at what research on Amish families actually shows, I find something that complicates the simple narrative of oppression that outsiders often apply. Amish women, in study after study, report high levels of satisfaction with their family lives. Not universal satisfaction, not uncomplicated satisfaction, but higher, on average, than the comparison populations researchers use. And one of the factors that appears repeatedly in attempts to explain this is the one I mentioned earlier: the proximity, the integration, the sense of building something shared and real with another person. Children, in a farming community, are not a burden added to a life that was otherwise complete. They are part of the fabric of a life that is understood from the beginning as communal and generative. That does not resolve the asymmetry, but it is part of the full picture. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and it is the thing I have thought about the longest since leaving the community. It is about silence. Not between couples in any language that the outside world would recognize as communication about the subject. Not in their sermons or their community discussions. It is handled through indirection, through example, through the practices and structures I have been describing, through the simple fact of being surrounded from birth by marriages that are understood to be lifelong and that are treated with a seriousness that the culture around them takes for granted. When I left the community and entered the English world, I was struck by how much the outside world talked about intimacy and how little of that talking seemed to produce understanding. There were books and podcasts and therapists and entire industries devoted to the subject, and yet the people around me seemed, on average, no more capable of sustaining deep and lasting intimacy than the people I had grown up among who never spoke of it directly at all. I do not think silence is the answer. I think the silence of my community caused real harm, left real questions unanswered, left real suffering unaddressed, because there was no language to speak it into. I do not romanticize the silence, but I have come to think that the Amish intuition underneath the silence, the intuition that intimacy is not primarily a subject to be discussed, but a practice to be cultivated, that it grows from proximity and commitment and shared labor, and the decision to remain even when remaining is difficult, that intuition is not wrong. It is not complete, but it is not wrong. What the Amish really believe about intimacy is this: that it is not something you find, it is something you build, that it requires a structure around it, not to contain it but to protect it from the thousand forces that will otherwise erode it, that the community around a marriage is not an intrusion on the intimacy inside it, but a condition of its survival. That the body is not an obstacle to the spirit, but a partner of it. And that the willingness to remain, to show up daily to the same person, in the same place, with the same commitment, is not a limitation on what intimacy can become. It is the condition that makes the deepest intimacy possible at all. I did not learn these things while I was inside the community. You rarely understand the water you are swimming in. I learned them slowly, over years, by leaving and looking back and trying to separate what was true from what was merely tradition, what was genuine wisdom from what was control, dressed in the language of faith. That work is not finished. I do not think it ever will be. But what I have found, at the center of what the Amish believe about intimacy, underneath all the practices and restrictions and silences, is something that I think every person who has ever tried to love another human being across time will recognize. The recognition that real intimacy is not a feeling that arrives. It is a choice that is made again, daily, in the ordinary hours of an ordinary life, until one day you look up and realize that you have built something that could not have been built any other way. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this. I know this is not the video many people expected when they clicked on this title. I know some of you came for something simpler and found instead something that required more of you. That you stayed anyway means more than I can easily say. But I want to be honest with you before you go. More than 90% of the people who watch these videos have still not subscribed. And if something in what I said tonight reached something real in you, something about what intimacy actually is and what it actually requires, I hope you will subscribe before you close this. It is free. It takes 1 second, and it means these conversations keep happening. The honest ones. The ones that do not give you simple answers, because the real questions do not have simple answers. Tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you the longest. Tell me what it made you think about your own life, your own relationships, your own understanding of what it means to be truly close to another person. I read every word, every single one. Intimacy is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose, again and again, in the quiet, ordinary moments that no one else sees. And those moments, accumulated over a lifetime, are the only thing that makes a life feel like it was truly shared.